Dear friends, for the past 9 years on the Shabbat closest to Veterans Day, we have been privileged through our synagogue's ongoing support of the Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council to welcome a member of their ranks. It is one way we affirm that partnership and our commitment to our men and women in uniform. Reaching back to the 1940s, when our Women's Auxiliary collected donations and held drives for war relief, and the USO operated a 24-hour canteen out of Wise Hall just beneath us, Temple Emanu-El has taken great pride in supporting our service women and men and our veterans of every faith. And through your generosity to our philanthropic fund, we remain devoted supporters of the Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council. Today, the JWB serves the approximately 10,000 Jewish men and women in the United States Armed Forces and their families. Indeed, for more than 100 years, in times of war and peace, the JWB has been fulfilling its mission to provide services that meet the religious, educational, and spiritual needs of Jewish military personnel in an inclusive and pluralistic manner. And it is the primary endorser of Jewish chaplains for the military, including tonight's most honored guest. A native of New York City, Major David Fromer graduated from Yale University in 2004, completing 4 semesters of modern Hebrew and receiving his BA with honors in history. After college, he enlisted as a lone soldier in the Israel Defense Forces, where he was assigned to the Nahal Infantry Brigade and served with distinction in the West Bank. Then he studied at the Reform Movement's Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion Debbie Friedman School of Sacred Music, first in Jerusalem, then in New York, earning a master's in sacred music and ordination as cantor. While at HUC, he commissioned in the New York Army National Guard as a chaplain candidate and completed the Chaplain Basic Officer Leadership course at the U.S. Army Chaplain Center and School at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Following his ordination in 2011, Chaplain Fromer deployed overseas as the first cantor ever to serve as a chaplain in the U.S. military, providing religious support for Jewish personnel stationed in Afghanistan, Kuwait, Jordan, and Qatar. After returning from his deployment, he transferred to the California Army National Guard, where he served on activations in response to forest fires and the COVID pandemic, and as cantor at synagogues in Santa Rosa and San Francisco. Major Fromer's military education also includes the Command and General Staff Officer Common Core course. This past summer, he transferred into the regular Army to begin his current assignment as Jewish chaplain at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. His awards and decorations include the Army Commendation Medal, the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, the Armed Forces Service Medal, and the NATO International Security Assistance Force Medal. He lives on post at West Point with his wife, herself a rabbi, and their 3 children. What I would also add is that I have known Major Fromer since he was my youth grouper more than 20 years ago at Central Synagogue. I claim no role in who he has become, but I sure am proud to know him. And I want to welcome his father, Henry, who is joining us too. Tonight, at this moment in our nation's history, for many one of anxiety and division, we pause to focus on the blessings this country provides us, our gratitude for which unites us. High among those is a military committed to protecting us at home and abroad, And it is in that spirit of profound thanks for his service that we welcome Cantor and Major David Fromer.
Shabbat Shalom. First of all, let me thank Rabbi Josh Davidson, not only for inviting me to offer the Dvar Torah this evening on Veterans Day Shabbat, but also for that lovely and warm introduction. I confess it took me a few minutes before I realized who he was talking about with all those awards, because even with all of the ribbons and medals that I've accumulated in my service, as my wife likes to point out, I still haven't gotten the medal for taking out the trash on time. So there's always room for improvement in the military as in life. But it's my first time on this bima since I was ordained as a cantor here at Temple Emanu-El 10 years ago. And while I was eager to return to the site of such happy memories, I confessed I was also a little bit nervous that a representative from the registrar's office at Hebrew Union College might interrupt our service with breaking news that my course credits had been miscalculated somehow, and my credentials as a uniformed chaplain were now under further review. Now, and if that sounds far-fetched to you, it wouldn't actually be the first time that services in this sanctuary here were disrupted by dramatic developments regarding military service. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, we'll hear more about that a little later in the sermon. It is quite a dramatic story. It's an honor to participate in Veterans Day Shabbat here at Emanu-El because, as Rabbi Davidson alluded to, this congregation has always led from the front in supporting our armed forces. In November of 1945, it was the Emanu-El Women's Auxiliary that organized the temple's first Veterans Day party for service members who were convalescing from the wounds of war. And though it featured only modest food and limited entertainment, the event was so successful that the Women's Auxiliary expanded their initiative to include several such gatherings of increasing magnitude each year. A temple bulletin from 1955 describes just one of that year's multiple Veterans Day celebrations here at Temple Emanu-El. It reads, "More than just another night away from the veterans' hospitals, the party was designed to have a homey atmosphere. There were flowers at each table, the china was bright and cheerful, and the food tasted like Mom made it. Dancing to a three-piece band followed dinner, and those who couldn't dance sat in their wheelchairs, remembering the time when they could. When the party was over, some guests took the flowers with them to their hospital rooms so that the memory could linger a while." The Women's Auxiliary's prodigious efforts here at Temple Emanu-El in the 1940s and 50s reflect the vast scale of American Jewish commitment to the military during the era of World War II. 550,000 American Jews, representing 11% of the national Jewish population, served in that conflict alone. But during the last 70 years, the percentage of American Jews in the military has dwindled to less than 2%. And while the vast majority of them come from Reform Jewish households, less than 1% of Reform rabbis currently serve in uniform to support them. If we are honest with ourselves, we must acknowledge that our observance of Veterans Day is thus somewhat conflicted. We are genuinely grateful to our service members and wish to acknowledge their sacrifice. But we also seem unbothered by the fact that fewer and fewer American Jews are moved to continue their work. While our community duly acknowledges the work of all veterans in preserving American freedom and security, I fear we no longer recognize the gifts bestowed to us by American Jewish veterans in particular. Deborah Dash Moore, a professor of history and Judaic studies at the University of Michigan, argues that the very idea of a single Judeo-Christian tradition, which radically advanced the acceptance in American society that we all enjoy, was forged in the united service of Jewish and Christian GIs during World War II. As soldiers, Jews became normal Americans, she writes, and legitimized themselves as equal partners with American Christians, both sharing American heritage and democratic faith, a common ground for all to stand on. Certainly, the Jewish experience in our country's uniformed services reflects this change over time. For example, in 1922, the U.S. Naval Academy's yearbook printed the picture and biography of Jewish graduate Leonard Kaplan on a special page that was perforated for easy removal. Lest anyone have been confused as to the publication's intent, Kaplan's picture shared the page with a caricature of a fictitious Jewish classmate named Porky from the town of Zion in the state of ignorance. Today, by contrast, the U.S. Naval Academy features 4 buildings named after Jews, including a Center for Jewish Life on campus with its own Jewish chaplain. Our military's unprecedented institutional support for Jewish personnel today was earned by Jewish veterans like Leonard Kaplan in the face of hardship and prejudice. I like to use the analogy that through their service and sacrifice, Jewish veterans built a home for us within the armed forces, a space of comfort and respect. But our Jewish community of today has decided to live elsewhere and left only a few dedicated residents, some of whom perhaps I see in the congregation this evening, to tend that property. To be fair, we did not make this decision alone, nor did we come to it lightly. Our retreat from enthusiastic military participation was joined by half of America's entire society in response to the national cataclysm of the Vietnam War. Rabbi Erwin Zeplowitz, who studied this period for his rabbinic thesis, describes the unimaginable scene when violent disagreements about the war erupted right here on this bima over the course of 3 successive Fridays in 1971. Were any of you by any chance here for these events? Anyone? No? Okay. Listen to this. Inspired by anti-war convictions, members of the Radical Jewish Union of Columbia University, led by Rabbi Bruce Goldman, stormed into the temple, attempting to seize the pulpit. "I'm a Jew in a synagogue. How can you arrest me?" screamed one of them as she was dragged away by plainclothes police. Rabbi Goldman hurled accusations of fascism at Emanu-El's senior rabbi, Nathan Perelman, before he was involuntarily removed as well. One protester, arriving late, attempted to gain entry, but was repelled by an usher who answered his claims of religious freedom by hitting him in the face with a prayer book. At the center of these bitter disagreements were America's political and military leaders, who increasingly resorted to public deceptions in their assessments of progress on the front lines. Their lies did not persuade the enemy to surrender, but they did ultimately convince half of America, that the military was no longer an institution that reflected its values or deserved its support. That conviction has remained in large part to this day, but I believe it is time for a reappraisal. Our Torah portion this week, Parshat Vayetze, and indeed all of the stories that cluster in this part of the Torah, will circle around the theme of deception. Last week, Jacob deceived his father Isaac to steal his brother Esau's blessing. This week, Jacob thinks he is marrying his beloved Rachel, but is tricked by her father into marrying her older sister Leah instead. The rivalry between Jacob's 2 wives produces 12 sons, but only one of them bequeaths to us the name of our people, Judah, after whom we are called Jews. Jacob praises Judah's ferocity in defense of his people, likening him to a lion, and it is Judah whose tribe will produce King David, arguably the greatest of all Jewish military leaders. But Judah is also a surprising choice for our namesake, considering he is responsible for 2 horrific deceptions of his own, both of which nearly result in murder. First, he is dishonest with his daughter-in-law Tamar, who is driven to desperate action and almost condemned to death accidentally by Judah's own decree. Then he persuades his brothers to sell Joseph into slavery and convince their father that his favorite son has been killed by wild beasts instead. Judah demonstrates the same duplicitousness that American Jews have not forgiven the U.S. military for from Vietnam. And yet we have forgiven Judah. We are still called Jews. Why? The rabbis teach us that Judah is selected for leadership not because he lies, but because he faces the consequences of his lies with teshuvah, recognition of his wrongdoing, and commitment to change for the better. Judah publicly acknowledges his mistreatment of Tamar and later volunteers himself as a slave if it will save the life of Benjamin, his father's second most favorite son. Judah earns his place as our namesake and earns our forgiveness as well, not through the military accomplishments of his tribe, but through the integrity and example of his character. As Jews, we are meant to inherit both of Judah's traits, his commitment to national defense on the one hand, and his commitment to justice on the other. As Reformed Jews, we are fully committed to justice. The pursuit of justice in our world is, for many of us, what animates our Judaism with purpose and life. But I believe Judah has a difficult lesson to teach us. We cannot achieve justice without service. We want to believe we can, but I fear the reality is that we cannot. The opportunities for bringing justice to our world and to our country are plentiful and diverse. They do not require uniformed service, family separation, and armed conflict. But if we are truly committed to honoring our veterans, we must recalibrate our relationship to service in general and military service in particular. Let us recall the foundation of our acceptance in society that military service laid and avoid the temptation to let other Jews defend our country for us. We all acknowledge that our military is not perfect, but neither was it perfect in 1922 when Leonard Kaplan overcame prejudice and anti-Semitism to graduate second in his class at the Naval Academy. Nor was the Army perfect in 1955 as the number of wounded Jewish soldiers nearly overwhelmed the Temple Emanu-El Women's Auxiliary. Nor was our military perfect in 1971 as we struggled to make sense of our government and military's deceptions on the very floor of this sanctuary. Judaism commands us, though, to focus not on imperfection, but on tikkun, repair. Even while our military strives to improve, that house within it that our Jewish veterans built for us cannot be maintained by so few Jews in uniform today. Let us join with our current Jews in uniform to restore service as a source of pride, so that we may once again answer the sacred call of Judah as defenders of our nation and advocates for justice, just as the generations of American Jews did before us. Shabbat Shalom.